Netflix's new show Adolescence, starring Owen Cooper and Stephen Graham, looks at young male violence. It has been praised all round through its depiction of a society which pushes men to extremely violent behaviour, including murder. It follows the story of a 15-year-old boy, Jamie Miller, played by Cooper, who is accused of stabbing a young girl to death. It's a social commentary which asks us to reflect on what roles we play in society. So this has wide acclaim, but of course there are some who are outraged at the show. You won't be surprised that it comes from the right wing, so much so that GB News decided to make a commentary on the show, accusing the producers of attacking an easy target: white people.
Are working class white men and boys always the easy target? Adolescence is the box office Netflix series that's got everyone talking. Now, it covers the harrowing story of a seemingly normal young lad who brutally kills a girl. Online radicalisation, incel culture, violence against women, these are all very real problems. But my concern is this. Will this perpetuate a narrative that the biggest problem in society and the biggest threat posed to women and girls comes from working-class white boys? Does it run the risk of demonising them? They are already told to check their privilege. They're already told that people who look like them are responsible for all of the world's evils. They're already the worst performing at school. It is always easier for celebrities and politicians to jump on a bandwagon if the problem is seen to be white Brits. Now, obviously, there are loads of documentaries and dramas on gang culture, but how many of them really get stuck into the issue of fatherlessness amongst the black community? How long will it be before Netflix commissions a series on the misogyny, backward and sexually violent attitudes towards women held by some people who have just entered Britain illegally from parts of the Middle East?
Honestly, they should name GB News the Karen News Network, since they're constantly outraged and they accuse everything of being woke. Sarah, while most people who've seen the show have praised it, the right wing have turned this into another anti-woke scandal. What do you make of this outrage, and what do you make of that clip from GB News?
I mean, of course they have. This is what they always do. A knee-jerk reaction to anything that they don't like is always classified as woke, because it challenges their carefully constructed narratives that don't suit their biases. And if they actually interrogated, I bet the people who watch GB News, etc., even that clip from GB News, I bet that show hasn't even been watched by them, because what it actually is exposing is a broader issue when it comes to misogyny, that it is essentially this pipeline into legitimate violence that starts to ensue. And this isn't about an honest critique of adolescence or even a genuine concern about representation. It's about controlling the narrative. The right-wing media ecosystem, like GB News, to the likes of Rob Schneider's, Twitter feed, which I know that you'll bring up in a second, but it spent the last decade basically perfecting this strategy, like slap the word woke on anything that you don't like, and outrage will ensue to shut down that conversation. But I even want them to unpack what woke actually means to them, because I feel like it's just this, let's just slap it on anything that we consider somewhat left leaning and have that conversation be completely shut up. But I don't know, that I'm having huge issues with the fact that they aren't even interrogating the fact that 10%, they're not even, I can't remember the statistics. This is an actual statistic though, that kids as young as 8 are exposed to really, really heinous things on the internet, pornography being one of them. And they fail to even interrogate that because it threatens their worldview. This isn't a matter of white, black, brown, whatever. This is something that's actually impacting our young people. And what are you going to do about it? So why does adolescence trigger them? Because it tells a story that they don't want told, to be honest. And I think that's what's triggered their conversation.
The presenter there, I forget his name, he says that he's trying to bring this down racial lines. The show itself doesn't talk about race. It's not about racial lines. It is actually about gender lines. It's about men. And that's maybe an uncomfortable conversation we should have, that there's an issue with male violence. And that transcends political, it transcends cultural and racial lines. there's a problem with male violence in this country, and there's a problem with male violence in Muslim majority countries or in Europe. It doesn't matter where it is. So I think this is trying to cover up gendered violence by saying, actually, it's more to do with race. And I do find it funny as well. And he admitted it himself. He says, okay, there has been a lot of TV and film documentaries and artwork on gangs, but not about absent fathers. And I wanted to sort of pick that bit out because, first of all, he admits that, yes, this isn't something we treat as taboo. I mean, we talk about black on black violence a lot. And, I mean, has he not seen The Wire? Which is an excellent TV show, by the way. It's we always talk about.
But the thing is, though, these are systemic issues that they don't want to talk about. But what's even interesting is that they will want to use the verbiage of black on black crime. Like, and then when it comes to a white person doing crime towards another white person, it's never called white on white crime. It's just called crime. So it's like they are constantly trying to cause these divisions between people by consistently categorizing every single person that they see. I'm not saying we need to live in a colorblind world, but they pick and choose when they want to engage with identity politics, and this is one of those instances. And it kind of, like you said, it's a broader issue. This is interrogating the fact that the National Police Chiefs Council has declared it's an endemic in the UK that that violence against women and girls is a problem, that it's an endemic, it's a national emergency, and it requires our immediate attention. And yet they've kind of twisted it into this, but white working class boys, like, how are you painting them to be these menaces of society when abuse, misogyny, sexism are all systemic issues that need all of our energy, all of our attention, and needs us to collaboratively work together to kind of dismantle that. But I don't know. I think, as you pointed out, like, the right is mad that the show didn't cast this black or brown kid as the role of the perpetrator. And that kind of tells you everything. Like, they're not upset about young people being unfairly depicted. They're upset that their racial narrative isn't, where knife crime is a problem of black youth, isn't being addressed in the way that they want it to be. Like, it's just not confirming their biases. So huge issues that need to address.
I mean, I'm currently reading Ash Sarkar's book, Minority Rule, and in the book, and she's made it on interviews as well, it's a really good point about how the right wing have adopted the white working class line, right? These same people 10 years ago were calling them chavs, but now they have shifted to concern trolling, and that they are the ones that care about the white working class, whilst the left hate them, and we're apparently only worried about immigrants and people of colour. Now, there has also been a lot of extremely racist framing online, comparing the casting of a young white boy to apparently the reality. It's spread so far that actor Rob Schneider, who has basically become a right-wing talking head instead of acting, well, he posted this. Now, the show didn't use any specific stories, okay? Some people are trying to pretend that it's based on the story they just race swapped. That's not true, okay? So the reason it being wokeness is categorically a lie. But because the weapon used in the show was a knife, these people are outraged that they didn't cast a person of colour. But I thought it was useful to play this clip of Akala on Channel 4 explaining how race has been weaponised on knife crime.
Every generation pretends gang crime is a new problem. So when you look at the press reports they cite in their scholarship, it's this same sort of sense of moral panic, this unprecedented thing. When actually we've had violent teenage youth gangs for 150, 200 years, maybe even longer. And the social indicators of that violence have remained identical for almost 200 years, as have the sort of facile explanations of
And those social indicators are?
Poverty, domestic abuse, lack of education, so expulsion from school. So, for example, almost half the people in prison today in Britain were expelled from school as children, versus just 1% in the population as a whole. Among young people, about half the young people in young offenders institutes were at some point in care growing up, versus about 1% in the population as a whole. So social indicators have remained identical. Explanations, or what we call moral panics, this sort of idea that just having enough police or just having tougher sentences will work. A good friend of mine, Dr. Baz Dreisinger, did a PhD looking at prisons all around the world, and she didn't find any correlation anywhere between tougher sentences and reduction of crime.
So those people who analyse it as a race problem,
yeah,
these are black gangs, these are Asian gangs, these are...
This is fascinating. I mean, let's just look at the maths. There are 1.2 million black people in London. In a bad year, 50 of them will kill someone. That's less than 0.004% of the black population. Therefore, anyone that thinks that blackness is a sufficient common denominator for violent crime clearly doesn't even understand what a common denominator is. Just to contrast, in a bad year in Glasgow, say 2005, there were 40 murders. There were only 600,000 people in Glasgow. So that year, a Glaswegian as a whole was twice as likely to be killed as a black Londoner. Whereas the commonalities, when you actually look at the demography of violent crime, the commonalities remain the same in Glasgow, Liverpool, Belfast, Naples, or London. Racial explanations are sort of way out for the powers that be, a way out for the wider society. And it's revealing that what happens in London is black on black crime, even when the person committing it is like me, has one white parent, one black parent. Okay, what happens in Glasgow, race is not important.
So what Akelard touches upon there, and I want to directly bring that back to, is it Patrick Christie, I think it's the presenter, who said that there's not enough documentaries talking about fatherless figures in black families. And this is where, obviously, the right get it wrong and weaponize it. And it's where liberals get it wrong. Akelard's talking about class, okay? It's not just absentee fathers. It's not just being on social media, the aspects of it, but it's austerity. It's closing down community centres. It's lack of opportunity. And simply saying we need to change the culture, which we obviously do, won't be enough. Sarah, I think it's pretty clear that the reaction of this show from the right wing about how a white young boy was failed by society and their response is to trash it completely exposes these people as absolute grifters and that they do not give a flying fuck about any young person, any young white person.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's why Adolescence triggers them, right? Because it tells a story that they don't want told. It literally tells them that young white working class boys are victims of this system that they keep backing, essentially. Like the right-wing media relies so heavily on a strict racial hierarchy when discussing crime and violence, particularly. So when a young black or brown kid commits a crime, they would frame it as some sort of cultural failure, blaming, like you said, absent fathers, rap music. We've seen the silencing of those within the music genre, where they say, oh, well, listen, the rap music is inciting violence, let's silence them. Or immigration as well. But then when a white kid is violent, they either ignore it or reframe it as some sort of isolated incident. Now, with this program in particular, it disrupts that. It says, well, it kind of forces us to ask, what drives young men, particularly regardless of race, towards violence, and what systemic failures have created those conditions, what systemic failures have created those structures. And like you said, it is decades and decades of austerity that has been pushed by right-wing governments, and it's played quite a significant role in that. The cuts in youth services, the cuts in community centres, the poverty, the socioeconomic deprivation, the access to education, like all of these things contribute to the failures that we're seeing at the moment. So instead of engaging with that, they pivot. And the claim that the show is anti-white, that it unfairly depicts white working class boys as these villains, or as violent, I think is absolutely absurd, especially considering how much right-wing media has spent years demonizing those same communities. So they pick and choose. There's a lot of irony to unpack there.
Sorry, I want to throw another wrinkle into this as well, which is that when you compare violence between maybe young black men and young white men, which is that if it's a white kid, they'll ignore it or make up some kind of story. There's also another element, which is that, and I'm not blaming Adolescence in any way, but it's part of the trap, which is that if a young white kid does something, a lot of people do go, well, that's society's fault. What are we going to do? What roles do we play? Which is the right questions we should be asking, right? But if it's a young black kid, say Rudy Cabana, no one will go, okay, well, what sort of society have we created where young people are committing violence? We go, no, it's obviously to do with their race, it's to do with their culture, it's to do with immigration. Exactly. So even with that, we're not given equal parity. Now, this doesn't excuse any of the crimes. If you're a young white kid that stabs and kills someone, or you're a young black kid that kills and stabs someone, it doesn't excuse that. But I do think that there's something very wrong with society when young people are doing such heinous crimes. I just ask for equal parity. And we're asking the right questions when it's a story about a young white kid. But if it's a young black kid, you wouldn't even get as far as asking these questions. It must be, we need to restrict immigration, and that's it. So I think there's a bit of a double standard here.
Oh, huge double
Yeah.
standard. Like, and I completely agree with you. And that's what makes it so ironic, because they're the ones that will say the classic things, or like, I don't see color, and don't play the race card, or rah, rah, rah. But like, that the right claims to hate identity politics, but their
They're
reaction,
obsessed with
their
it.
reaction
That's all they
proves-
talk about is identity politics.
Yeah, it proves that their entire worldview is identity politics. Like,
Oh,
you don't
yeah.
care about working class kids. You literally said this verbatim, that you don't care about working class kids unless you can weaponize them against minorities. And you don't care about knife crime unless you can use it to justify that more policing needs to happen in Black communities. Like, so they don't care about the social conditions that have created these atrocious things, that create violence, because they require them to hold people to account. And I don't think they like the word accountability. So yeah, I mean, Adolescence, their response to that, I think, exposes a lot, but actually this is a broader trend across so many different stories. Any story that comes out about someone who comes from a minoritized community is one that is weaponized to a certain extent.
If you're watching and you might not consider yourself on the left, maybe you come to this channel and you're curious, I'll say to you, go watch left-wing content, left-wing streamers and news channels. Not news channels, we have no mainstream presence, but on YouTube. And then go watch GB News, go watch the right-wing corporate media, and compare and judge. See who talks more about identity politics and culture wars. You'd be very surprised, because they talk about it every single day. They'll find a new thing to be outraged about. Whereas, yes, of course, we talk about culture and social issues, but we also like to talk about class and economic issues, which is something the right does not want to talk about. So if you want to know who the real identitarians are, it's those guys.
I am really sick and tired of the word woke being thrown around at things that they just don't like. It's classic right-wing playbook. Like, one, I'm going to find a piece of media that challenges my worldview. My second step is I'm going to cry woke to discredit it. And then the third step that they always do is they're going to try and rally up as much disruption as possible, like rally up their base just so they can distract from real issues. I'm really sick and tired of hearing the word woke be thrown in my face as someone who's incredibly left-leaning, when we're actually just trying to highlight the structural issues that are impacting people that need to be, like, the ones that are silenced in society. Like, it honestly enrages me, and I feel myself getting quite hot just thinking about it, because I'm just like, you can't just scream woke every single time you don't like something. It's wild to me.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.